يا أيها المزمل قم الليل إلا قليلا نصفه أو انقص منه قليلا أو زد عليه ورتل القرآن ترتيلا.
السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. الحمد لله حمدا كثيرا طيبا مباركا فيه، والصلاة والسلام على رسول الله وعلى آله وأصحابه أجمعين. Welcome to the 13th episode in this series. And in this episode, we want to discuss briefly the rules of at-tafkhim and at-tarqiq, or at-tarqiq and at-tafkhim. So what do we mean by this? If we remember that when we discussed Sifatul Huruf, we mentioned the letters of Al-Isti'la. When we pronounce them, we elevate the back of the tongue to make them heavy. So making a letter heavy is at-tafkhim. This is what is at-tafkhim, making a letter heavy. So the 28 letters of the Arabic alphabet, they are divided, and so some letters are heavy and some letters are light. So in this topic, we will divide them into three parts. So we have the letters of at-tafkhim, which is the heavy letters. And at-tafkhim means to make something heavy or big. So by raising the tongue, then we make it heavy. So we have the letters of at-tafkhim. And these letters are the letters that we mentioned before. What are they? Khussa, dogtin, kill. These are the huruf al-isti'la. Khussa, dogtin, kill. Kha, sa, dad, ghain, ta, qaf, and dha. So we have the letters. These letters are always heavy. These letters, they are always heavy. Okay? And they have levels. And the scholars divided them based on their characteristics. Because the characteristics of the letters that we also discussed, some of them are strong characteristics, whereas some of them are weaker characteristics. Like shidda is a strong characteristic, like jahar is a strong characteristic. So a letter that has all its characteristics being strong is going to be the strongest in its tafkhim. So the strongest letter, or the heaviest letter, is the ta. The ta, then followed by the dad, then followed by the ta, then followed by the sad, then followed by the qaf, and then the ghain and the kha. So this is the arrangement. So some letters are heavier than others. The other issue with regards to, so this is their nature, the nature of the letters. But with regards to the tafkhim also, the heaviness of the letter depends on the haraka on it. The heaviness of the letter depends on the haraka on it. So again, the scholars divide it into about 4 levels. So a letter with a fatha and a mad. A fatha and a mad. So like taghut, ta fatha mad, taghut. So a fatha and a mad is the heaviest. So that level of heaviness is higher than tabaqa, for example. Or, so it's heavier than that. So for the letter ta, which is one of the heavier ones, because again the letters of al-itbaq, they are generally heavier than the letters of al-istifala. And the letters of al-itbaq are the ta, the dha, the dad, and the sad. So those ones are still heavier than the qaf, the ghain, and the kha. So the fatha with the mad is the heaviest, and then the fatha, and then the dhamma, and then the kasra. So the letter with the fatha is still going to sound heavier than the letter with the dhamma, and the one with the dhamma is still going to sound heavier than the letter with a kasra. So these are 4 levels. And what about when the letter has a sukun? When the letter has a sukun, the scholars say the heaviness in pronunciation is going to be dependent on the letter before it. So it's going to be dependent on the letter before it. So if the letter before the sukun is a fatha, then we're going to give the harful isti'la with a sukun, we're going to give it the level of heaviness as if it had a fatha. And if the letter before it is a dhamma, we'll give it the level of heaviness as if it had a dhamma. And if it's a kasra, we're going to give it the level of heaviness as if it has a kasra. So in actual fact, there are 4 levels. Fatha with alif, fatha alone, dhamma alone, and kasra alone. And if it had, a sukun, then we'll put it in one of those levels. So that's with regards to the tafkhim. So, but what is important here is that when the letter of tafkhim has a kasra, the tafkhim is fairly light, especially those letters that don't have isti'la. Sorry, not isti'la, itbaq. The qaf, the ghain, and the kha. So, for example, you don't say waqila. So it's too heavy. The scholars call it at-tafkhim nisbi. It's a relative tafkhim, relative heaviness. You're just going to make it a little. It's just because it's at the lower end in terms of the letters of tafkhim, and then it has a kasra, which is the lowest level of tafkhim. So you don't say waqila, you say waqila. So it's just a little bit. And the same thing if, for example, you say fakhruje. So what is before the kha with a dhamma, with a sukun, is a fatha. Fakhruje. So you make it kha heavy, properly heavy. Fakhruje. But when it is, for example, ikhraja, you don't say ikhraja, because what is before the kha, it's a kasra. And so it's going to be at the lowest. So it's ikhraja. So it still has, because it's harful isti'la, it's heavy, the tongue is raised at the back, so it has some heaviness. But you are going to put it at the level of the kasra, which is tafkhimun nisbi, which is relative heaviness. So you don't say ikhraja, that's too much, it's ikhraja, and like that. So that's for the tafkhim of the letters of al-isti'la. So all the other Arabic letters, apart from these letters of al-isti'la, they have tarqiq with exception. So we have talked of letters that always have tafkhim, and then apart from the ra, the lam, and the alif of the mad, when it's preceded by a letter of tafkhim, then all the other letters have tarqiq. They are made light. And we may be able to mention some examples of that, but I want us to talk about the middle, which is the letters that have sometimes tafkhim and sometimes they have tarqiq. So we said apart from the ra, the lam, and the alif of mad, That's because these three letters, sometimes they have tafkhim, sometimes they have tarqiq. If they had tafkhim all the time, we'll have put them with the first level. And if they have tarqiq all the time, we'll have put them with the second level. But they have sometimes tafkhim and they have sometimes tarqiq. So as for the alif of the mad, then it follows what is before it. And this does not require any effort. Because if you have given the letter before it tafkhim, then the alif of the mad will naturally have tafkhim. If you give the letter before it tarqiq, then it will have tarqiq. So you say, al-zalimin, al-zalimin. So the alif, the mad, has tafkhim together with the dha. And you say, khalidina fiha, khalidina fiha. And the kha appears to be one of the letters of tafkhim that suffers the most sometimes when people don't, apply this very well. So many people will say, khalidina fiha. So they give the kha a tarqiq. So if you give the kha a tarqiq here, you say, khalidina fi. Then you have also given the mad a tarqiq. That alif, you have also given it tarqiq. So the kha should be given, it's the one that tends to suffer the most. The others, the sound tends to be obvious when it's changed, but the kha, you say, people give it more tarqiq than the others. So that's for the alif, and that really depends on pronouncing the letter before it correctly. If the letter before it pronounced correctly, then that will be fine. As for the lam, sometimes we said sometimes these letters have tafkhim, sometimes they have tarqiq. The lam, again, the lam is we know it's not one of the letters of istila. So ideally it should have tarqiq. So it always has tarqiq, except in some situations. And the lam that has tafkhim in the Quran is only the lam in Allah's Jalala, in the name of Allah. The lam in Allah. The lam in Allah. That lam, sometimes, all other lams in the Quran will always have tarqiq, they will be light. But the lam in Allah will have tafkhim sometimes it will have tarqiq. When will it have tafkhim? When it is preceded by a fatha or a dhamma. When it is preceded by a fatha or a dhamma, it will have tafkhim, it will be pronounced heavy. Now, it doesn't matter whether this fatha, like when you're starting on it, you say Allah. Although what begins it is hamzatul wasl, this hamza that we remove when we want to join another word to it. But we are giving it a fatha here, so it's going to be Allah, not Allah. So it's not Allah. So that's not correct, because you're making it light. So it's Allah. Allah. And another point to note here is not to make the hamza itself heavy. Hamza is light, so don't say Allah. It's not Allah. So because what happens is when you want to make a letter heavy, you may make the one before it heavy also in preparation. So you don't say Allah, you say Allah. So the hamza should be light. So you say Qala Allah, not Qala Allah. Not because here the qa is heavy, the lam is light, and then the lam of Allah is heavy. So don't say Qala Allah. It's Qala Allah. So these are things that need to be taken note of, and you need to recite to a teacher to show you some of these errors sometimes. So Inna Allah, Inna Allah. Okay, so wa kalimatullahi, Rasulullahi, Rasulullah. So that's preceded by a dhamma, Rasulullah. So, but, and it doesn't matter whether, what is important is that the sound that precedes the Allah is fatha or dhamma. It may be that the letter that precedes Allah has sukun, like when you say ala Allahi, it is, but the sound that precedes Allah has fatha. The lam has fatha, then there is a ya with a sukun, then there is Allah. So we don't take notice of the ya because we are not pronouncing it anyway. So in all these circumstances, the lam in lafz jalala, it has a tafkhim, it should be made heavy. Unlike when you say lillahi. So the lam here has tarkik, it's light. You can't say lillahi. You don't say lillahi, you say lillah, lillah. Balillah, balillah, qulillahumma. So you don't say qulillahumma. So this is the situation with the lam. It's only in the word Allah and when this is preceded by a fatha or a dhamma. Then we'll go to the ra. And the ra may be a bit more complex. So the ra again is not one of the huruf al-isti'la. So originally it should not be heavy. But in many circumstances, and the circumstances in which the ra is heavy are actually more than the circumstances in which the ra is light in the Quran. So when is the ra made heavy? And I will try to make it simple. There are many things that the scholars list. I will try to make it simple. Number one, we'll talk of when the ra has a haraka and when it has a sukun. Okay. When the ra has a haraka, it's fairly clear. If it has a fatha, it is heavy. If it has a dhamma, it is heavy. If it has a kasra, it is light. That's just simple. 3. A fatha, it is heavy. For example, shahru Ramadan, shahru Ramadan, Ramadan. So you don't say Ramadan. You don't say Ramadan. You say Ar-Rahman, Ar-Rahman Ar-Rahim. You don't say Ar-Rahman. So you don't say Ar-Rahman. That is light, raw. So it should be heavy. So that's when it has a fatha. When it has a dhamma, rusul. So you say rusul, rusul. So it should be heavy, and it should not be rusul. You say rusul, then you made it light. And when it has a kasra, then that is easy. Rijal. That is easy. So that's when it has a haraka, and that's straightforward. Now, when the ra has a sukun, an original sukun, and what we mean by original sukun is a proper sukun on the ra, not that you are stopping at the end. So a word may have a ra at the end, and it has a haraka, but when you stop on it, you give it a sukun. We will talk about that. But firstly, when the ra has an original sukun. So what are the rulings regarding that? So when this sukun, when the ra has a sukun, we look at the letter before it. If the letter before it has a fatha, then we make the ra to be heavy. If the letter before it has a dhamma, then we make the ra to be heavy. Okay? And if the letter before it has a kasra, then it may be light, it may be heavy. When will it be light? Or when will it be heavy? If the letter before it has a kasra, and the letter after it is one of the huruful isti'la, the heavy letters, khussa, doctrine, kill, with a fatha or a dhamma, then the ra will remain heavy. So what is before it has a kasra, what is after it is harful isti'la, with a fatha or dhamma, then again the ra is heavy. But if it has a kasra before it, and after it is any other harf other than harful isti'la, then the ra is light. Let's give quick examples so that it will be a bit easier. So for example, you have Al-Quran with a dhamma before the ra. Al-Quran. So you don't say Al-Quran. Al-Quran. No, you say Al-Quran. Okay? The example, so when the ra is preceded by a kasra, and the letter after it is harful isti'la, we said it will be what? It will be heavy. So the example is mirsada or labil mirsada. Labil mirsada. So you don't say mirsada, you say mirsada, not mirsada. So like qirtas, qirtas, not qirtas. So this should be made heavy. However, if the letter of istila has a kasra, then it should not be made heavy, although it is said this is either you can make it heavy or you can make it light. You can either make it heavy or you can make it light. So that's when the harf istila that follows it has a kasra. So that's the example when the ra has a sukun. There is another type of ra with a sukun. When the ra with a sukun is the beginning of the letter. That's when the ra with a sukun is preceded by hamzatul wasl. What do I mean? I believe we know the hamzatul wasl, which is the hamza that if you are starting on it, you give it a haraka. If you are reading and you pronounce something before it, you skip the hamza. I will give an example. So when that ra with a sukun is preceded by hamzatul wasl, this is a different ruling. It permanently receives tafkhim, regardless of what is before it, be it a kasra, be it a dhamma, be it a fatha, regardless of what is after it. If the ra is preceded by hamzatul wasl, then it receives tafkhim. So, for example, irji'u, this is a ra with a dhamma. What we are pronouncing before it is a kasra, and what is after it is not harful isti'la, but we are still giving it tafkhim. Okay? Irji'u, you don't say irji'u. Irji'u liman irtada, liman irtada. So you don't say liman irtada. So it should be heavy. So when a ra sukun is preceded by hamzatul wasl, then this ra is always heavy. Now, when the ra sukun, or when the ra, so that's the ra sukun, we've talked about when it has haraka, when it has sukun. When the ra is at the end of a word, and it's not having an original sukun. Most of the time it will have a haraka. It will have a haraka, but this, because you are stopping on it, you are going to give it a sukun in this. So it's going to be a sukun al-arid. It's just a conditional sukun because you are stopping on it. Okay, so what do we do with this? Again, if what precedes it is a fatha or kasra, a fatha or dhamma, we make it heavy. We make it heavy. But if what precedes it is a kasra, we make it light. Just like we said before. If what precedes it is a fatha or dhamma, we make it heavy. If what precedes it is a kasra, we make it light. However, if what precedes that ra that we are stopping on has a sukun, then we have to look at what is before the sukun. Okay? If what is before the sukun is a fatha or dhamma, we make it heavy. If what is before the sukun is a kasra, we make it light. Let's give quick examples. So, typically, wal fajr. Wal fajr. We are stopping on al fajr. What is before the ra? The ra has a sukun because we are stopping on it. What is before the ra is jim with a sukun. And what is before the jim is a fa with a fatha. So we make it tafkhim wal fajr walayalin ashr walayalin ashr washaf'i wal watr والليل إذا يسر هل في ذلك قسم لذي حجر لذي حجر لذي حجر. So what is before the jim this time around is a ha with a kasra. So we say lidhi hijr. We don't make it tafkhim. And that is the summary of the rules of the ra with regards to tafkhim or tarkik. In all other situations, then we'll make it tarkik as we have explained before. We'll stop here until we meet next time. Subhanakallahumma bihamdik. أشهد أن لا إله إلا أنت أستغفرك وأتوب إليك.